Why does Russia keep fighting a war it cannot afford, can't win quickly, and cannot seem to step away from? People ask me this almost every week. And the real answer has nothing to do with military strategy. It has everything to do with the fear of losing power. I'm Elvira Bary, a writer born in the Soviet Union, and today we are going to peel back the layers of Russia's political mind. Not the propaganda story, but the inner logic of a system that is more afraid of peace than of defeat. Here's where we are going. Why negotiations are impossible right now for both sides. What the Kremlin truly wants, and why conquering Ukraine is not actually the point. Why ordinary Russians once cheered this war, and why that support is quietly eroding. Why Russia's elites stay silent, even as the system eats their future. If independent analysis matters to you, it would mean a lot if you liked this video, shared it with someone curious about Russia, or subscribed so you don't miss the next chapters. And if you'd like to go one step further, you can join the think tank or support via Super Thanks or PayPal. That's what keeps this work possible. Let's begin. Why negotiations are impossible right now? A war can end in only two ways. Either one side prevails, or both sides reach the grim realization that further fighting won't bring them anything new, and they finally sit down at the negotiating table. The war in Ukraine clearly belongs to the second category. So why can't Putin just stop? Why drag this out when every extra week makes Russia weaker, poorer, and more isolated? Because, in the Kremlin's mind, exactly the same question applies to Ukraine. From Putin's perspective, the logic goes like this. Fighting makes Ukraine even weaker than Russia. So why doesn't Zelensky stop? Doesn't he see the cost? Negotiations start only when at least one side decides that nothing more can be gained on the battlefield, that the limits have been reached. That is how Germany signed the armistice in World War I. But in this war, neither Russia nor Ukraine believes those limits have arrived, and for completely different reasons. From inside Putin's bubble, Russia is winning. Not rapidly, not gloriously, but steadily. And if you believe you are gaining ground, why stop? There is also a deeper, darker calculation. What Russia has already captured is too little to justify the staggering losses. So many men killed, so much money was literally burned in the fire of war. How do you explain all of this to your own elites if the result is just a handful of ruined villages? In the Kremlin's mind, the only way to justify the enormous losses is to push harder and seize a bigger prize, something Putin can present to his people and to the world as proof that the sacrifice was worth it. If Russia bombs enough Ukrainian apartment blocks, if it keeps dismantling critical infrastructure, then, so the thinking goes, Ukraine will eventually break and accept Moscow's terms. This is the fantasy they continue to chase. Ukraine views negotiations from the opposite angle, with the fear that any peace talks could be a trap that leaves the country in a worse position than before. Ukrainian officials understand that a pause in fighting would give Russia time to regroup, rebuild, and return with even stronger demands. They know that Ukraine cannot, right now, liberate every occupied territory and restore the 1991 borders. But they are far more afraid of surrendering more than they must. Because any concession tells the Kremlin, this method works. You can attack your neighbor, kill thousands, destroy cities, and still walk away with something. That is an invitation for Putin or someone like him to repeat the whole thing in 5 or 10 years. And there's also the moral side of this war that Western commentators often overlook. Negotiations aren't just about land, they are about people. On the occupied territories, the reality is horrific. Ukrainian men are kidnapped, drafted, and forced to fight against their own country. Many have already died. In Donetsk, basic life is collapsing. Electricity fails, water disappears, and sewage systems stop working. Homes are seized, declared abandoned, nationalized, and handed out as rewards to officials and officers. How can a government negotiate away those people? How can it sign a document knowing that more Ukrainians will be handed over to this fate? For Kiev, negotiating too early is not only risky, it feels like a betrayal of the very people they are trying to protect. Both sides have reasons that make sense inside their own worldview, and both sides could be disastrously wrong. Russia may not be advancing nearly as successful as Putin believes. Its resources may be running out faster than the rosy reports suggest. The domestic situation may be far more fragile than what reaches his desk. Ukraine too may face exhaustion, shortages, or a sudden collapse of part of the front line. There is only one thing that can change this deadlock: a shift inside the minds of those who make the decisions. To understand when or if that shift might happen, we have to examine the worldview that shapes Putin's decisions. What the Kremlin truly wants. When people ask, what is Putin's goal in this war, they expect something strategic, something rational. Territory, resources, a buffer zone, security guarantees. I see this all the time on YouTube. Dozens of English-speaking pundits explaining Russian strategy as if it were crafted by someone who graduated from Harvard, studied geopolitics, and took military inspiration from Scipio Africanus to the present day. Let me be very clear. These people have no idea how the Kremlin thinks. Not because they lack intelligence, but because they imagine the Kremlin as a Western institution. It is not. It has never been. The Russian leadership did not build a strategy class. They built a survival machine, and the point of that machine is not military excellence, not smart resource management. The point is to stay in power at any cost. By 2019, the Russian regime had a problem so serious it was almost taboo to say it aloud. It was aging. Putin was aging. His inner circle was aging, and the system they built had no safe mechanism for transferring power. If he stepped aside, everything could collapse. His family could face danger, his loyal elites could be purged, the wealth and privileges they amassed could be seized, and he himself could end up in front of a criminal court. So remaining in power was not a fantasy of an ambitious man. It was the only path to safety. In any autocracy, power concentrates in one person only, when everyone around him believes their own future depends on him staying in charge. When that belief fades, the magic of authority fades with it. In 2019, that belief was fading fast, and Putin believed he had to do something about it before it's too late. That is when he began planning his war against Ukraine. In his worldview, Ukraine was stepping outside its assigned role. It behaved не по понятиям, not according to the unwritten rules of the post-Soviet neighborhood. It dared to choose its own future. It flirted with the West. Its oligarchs manipulated gas prices and played both sides. To a ruler who sees himself as an alpha male in a violent hierarchy, this was insubordination. And in that worldview, if the alpha does not demonstrate strength, he loses respect. The annexation of Crimea in 2014 restored that sense of respect for a while. Putin's approval rating soared, and the public enjoyed an emotional high of historic greatness. But by 2019, the effect had faded. The pandemic arrived. Daily life became stressful, and people grew irritable and disillusioned once again. The regime needed a new miracle. And according to the reports landing on Putin's desk, Ukraine was the perfect target. Weak, corrupt, divided, infiltrated from top to bottom by Russian agents, and allegedly ready to collapse in a matter of days. It was supposed to be Crimea 2.0, only bigger, louder, and more glorious. People often ask, how could Putin be so wrong? How could he believe something so absurd? The answer is brutally simple. Because in the Kremlin, no one is rewarded for telling the truth. Modern Russia is run by elderly men who live inside their own information bubble. A bubble created by the people whose careers depend on keeping the boss happy. Every one of these men sits atop a network of loyalists whose promotions depend on the leader's mood. And his mood depends entirely on the news he receives. If everything is going wrong, you don't say, so we lost 1,000 men in capture 3 ruined houses. You say, today, on the day of national unity, our heroic forces delivered a victory. The Russian flag now flies over the liberated settlement of Большие Кирпичи. He does not know where that is. He does not care. He only cares that the news feels uplifting. The system works exactly like a casino. The player always believes that the next move will bring the jackpot. The generals, the FSB, the ministers, they are the casino floor managers, paid to keep him believing. Because as long as he believes in an eventual victory, they keep their budgets, their contracts, and their places on the social ladder, along with all the privileges that matter so much in this climate of intrigue and constant competition for resources. So, when you live in a world where every report tells you you are advancing, gaining, progressing, why would you stop? In Putin's mind, the war is not a mistake. It is the only available strategy for political survival. Stopping is more dangerous than continuing. Peace is more threatening than war. But doesn't he feel sorry for his own countrymen who are dying by the thousands? Doesn't he understand that this war is making life in Russia dramatically worse? No. In his mind, the public supports him. That's what every report on his desk insists. And as for those who die, they are not considered valuable. Their attitude is simple and cruel. They would have died anyway. From alcohol, from accidents, from poverty. These men, in the eyes of the system, never had much of a life to begin with. So why not let them contribute to Russia's glory and earn some money along the way? Why ordinary Russians supported the war? But what about ordinary Russians? Don't they want the war to end? Can they say anything about it? Can they demand peace the way Americans once demanded an end to the war in Vietnam? In the first months of the full-scale invasion, Russian society behaved in a way that seemed almost surreal. Millions of people supported a catastrophe that brought them no personal benefit. The reason for this becomes clear only if we understand one thing. For most Russians, the war was not real yet. It existed as a television spectacle, a patriotic show that demanded nothing, cost nothing, and offered a powerful sense of emotional belonging. Belonging is one of the most fundamental human instincts. When your own life feels small, insecure, or tightly controlled, you instinctively seek something larger to attach yourself to, something that softens the feeling of personal insignificance. There's a Russian saying: "Этот человек ничего слаще морковки не пробовал." Someone who has never tasted anything sweeter than a carrot. People like that are easy to manipulate. You can demand almost anything from them and pay only in slogans and patriotic cliches. An excellent bargain for the elites, isn't it? What keeps ordinary people loyal to the regime is the illusion that the elites and the common folk form one noble, unified nation, sharing the same goals, the same values, the same destiny. That is the central purpose of patriotic propaganda. But admission into this imagined club comes with a price. You must sacrifice something: your health, your future, perhaps even your child's life. Empires and authoritarian systems depend on psychological games like this. They offer a grand narrative that makes people believe their small, restricted lives gain meaning when attached to a great power. And as long as this illusion holds, the system survives. This is why the annexation of Crimea in 2014 produced such a massive emotional high. Russians felt suddenly elevated. Look, we matter again. Our country is powerful. We are winning. When the 2022 invasion began, many expected a repeat, a quick triumph, a historic correction, another injection of imperial pride. And for several months, the war truly did feel like a televised drama. People discussed it, argued about it, followed it the way they would follow a sport tournament or a soap opera. It remained distant and abstract. That illusion ended in September 2022, when the Kremlin announced mobilization. Even though it lasted only briefly, its psychological impact was enormous. For the first time, the war forced itself into people's kitchens. It reached their husbands, sons, and brothers. Panic spread so quickly that the authorities shut down the mobilization almost as soon as it began. But the damage was done. Fear had replaced excitement. Yet the Kremlin could not stop the war. They had already knocked over the tray. To borrow from an old Russian joke about a wolf and a crow on an airplane. The crow proudly knocks over the stewardess's tray just to show off. The wolf copies him, and both get thrown out of the plane. As they fall, the crow asks, "Wolf, can you fly?" He answers, "No." Then why were you showing off? This is Putin's dilemma. After the retreat from Kiev, stopping the war would mean admitting weakness. Continuing it is irrational, but stopping it is dangerous. In an authoritarian system, the appearance of strength often matters more than actual strategic outcomes. You have to pretend you can fly. Unable to rely on mass mobilization, the Kremlin turned to those who were willing to fight for money: the desperate, the poor, the socially invisible. Marginalized men from impoverished regions, prisoners offered freedom in exchange for survival, people whose deaths would not cause public outrage. From these losses alone, one could build an entire city, and in that city, the vast majority would be men the state never valued in the first place. Meanwhile, the elite lives in a parallel universe. Ordinary citizens face higher taxes, rising prices, failing infrastructure, blackouts, and the fear of their sons being drafted. But among the upper caste, life goes on with surprisingly few disruptions. They earn money on wartime contracts, expand their influence, and continue to travel abroad when necessary. A recent case made headlines when a well-known pro-war actress was spotted vacationing in Amsterdam. For ordinary Russians, Europe is closed. For the elite, it simply requires some negotiations and maybe a private jet. This divide is visible everywhere. Visit the websites of elite Moscow schools. The war is barely mentioned. But in rural schools, the war is the main theme, portrayed as destiny and duty. The message is clear. The children of the poor are cannon fodder. The children of the rich are the future ruling class. Still, war spreads like an infection. Even those who try to ignore it feel the symptoms. Drones buzzing overhead, occasional explosions, citywide blackouts, regions where mobile internet is shut off entirely and familiar everyday conveniences collapsing. No taxi apps, no maps, bank cards failing at the supermarket, messengers blocked, and for families with sons of conscription age, a constant fear that the next military summons might be for them. Under such pressure, a dangerous question begins to surface. Why did we start this war if we achieved none of our goals? Russia wanted an empire, obedience from Ukraine, fear from Europe, and respect from the United States. Instead, many now suspect that their leaders are wolves who don't know how to fly. And this is where repression becomes necessary. The Kremlin must prevent these questions from forming, let alone spreading. That is why repression has expanded far beyond the position. Even loyal bloggers can suddenly be labeled foreign agents. Even loyal businessmen and regional officials can be arrested. Fear must remain universal. Vulnerability must feel constant. Only then can the illusion of progress be maintained. This is why the war cannot end now. For the Kremlin, peace does not mean stability. Peace means accountability, and accountability is what the regime fears most. The silence of the elites. So why are Russia's elites silent? After all, unlike the general population, they know exactly what is happening. For the last 25 years, the Kremlin has built an elite class that is either complicit in crimes or carefully selected for absolute spylessness. These are not independent actors. They are not professionals with transferable skills. They are people who owe their entire existence to one person and whose only real talent is managing corruption. The Russian elite operates on the principle of vassalage. You do not rise by competence. You rise because you have the right patrons, the right family connections, and the right schemes to drain public budgets. And you must never, under any circumstances, shine brighter than the boss. You cannot be smarter than him, more popular than him, or more successful than him. To be any of these things is to invite your own destruction. This is the tragedy of the Russian ruling class. They cannot lead the sinking ship because they have no skills that would allow them to survive outside it. This is one of the themes of my upcoming novel, The Snow Queen's Spring. The main character, wildly successful by Russian standards, eventually realizes she's not an entrepreneur at all. She is a specialist in elaborate corruption. That is her craft. That is what she has spent her life perfecting. And outside the system, that craft is useless. Yes, she could flee to Argentina and live as a rentier on stolen money, but for someone who has been trained to dominate and win inside a rigid hierarchy, that is not a life. That is an exile. But anxiety has already spread through all layers of the elite. They see the collapse coming, they see the war dragging on, they see sanctions solidifying, they see the military failures and the economic rot. No one is truly loyal. Everyone is simply afraid. And the Kremlin knows this. It knows the system is cracking, which is why it has begun creating new elites. By the way, if you want to follow the creation of my new novel as it happens, with behind-the-scenes notes, unusual historical facts, and even the songs I somehow ended up composing along the way, join my newsletter. It's where the whole creative world of my books comes to life. The link is in the description. When you combine all these threads, the picture becomes crystal clear. Stopping the war would mean confronting questions that would destroy the regime. Why did we start? Why did we lose so many? Where did the money go? Who is responsible? Stopping would also force the elites to reconsider their loyalty. It would open space for blame, betrayal, and internal coups. It would expose the full scale of military failure and economic decline, and it would show that the strong man cannot deliver victory. For this system, peace is far more dangerous than war. That is why Putin cannot stop. Before we finish, I want to leave you with a question that cuts straight to the heart of this whole story. Given everything we've uncovered tonight, the fear, the lies, the internal rivalries, the obsession with survival, what do you think could be Putin's ultimate exit strategy? Not the one analysts talk about, not the one propaganda suggests, the real one. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and your insights often move this channel in directions I never expected. And if my work helps you understand this region a little better, if it gives you clarity in a world full of noise, then please consider supporting this channel. You can join the think tank, become part of the community that keeps this work alive. You can leave a super thanks or buy me a coffee or support via PayPal, whatever is comfortable for you. And of course, like, share, and subscribe. Those small actions are what tell the algorithm this conversation matters. Don't bury it. Thank you for watching, for thinking, and for caring. Because caring about the truth is already an act of resistance in a time of convenient lies. Take care of yourself, wherever you are in the world.